And we were wondering we know how it's changed the conversation here inside the Beltway, but we were wondering how it's changed schools. We were wondering basically if educators were getting more questions from their students about where they stand politically, how political polarization affected their relationships with their colleagues. So instead of just calling a bunch of teachers, we actually put out a survey into the field with the help of the Education Week Research Center to get to the bottom of some of those questions. So I'll just give you a quick recap on what we found. And generally speaking, educators told us they didn't think it was their role to discuss politics with their students. But more than half said that they didn't avoid political activities just because of their jobs. They were still willing to go out there and canvass and do all of that. And while the majority of educators were Democrats, which is sort of the stereotype, and they did support Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election, their views really didn't line up in neat partisan boxes. For instance, even Republican educators are skeptical of school choice, especially vouchers. And many Democrats had reservations about the impact of immigration on K-12 schools, or don't feel super comfortable with transgender students using the bathroom of their gender identity, even though that was an idea pushed by the Obama administration. Since then, we've actually done a couple of other surveys. This summer, we talked to principals about civics education, and they told us they didn't think there was nearly enough civics education in schools. And we surveyed first-time voters about a few months ago, and they said that they were more likely to go to the polls if they'd had some sort of a standalone civics class in school. About 60% of them said that they were likely to vote in the midterm election, but only about half could name a candidate on the ballots. That was pretty interesting. So what has our polarized landscape meant for K-12 schools and the people who work in them? And what, if anything, can educators do to help bridge the political divides? So with us to unpack these questions, we've got a great panel of educators, including some folks who were part of the survey. We have a superintendent, a principal, and a teacher, and they all at some point have been named Superintendent of the Year, Principal of the Year, or Teacher of the Year. So we've got a really distinguished group up here. Jeanne Collins is the Superintendent of the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union District in Vermont. Dennis Barger is the Principal of Vail Academy and High School in Tucson, Arizona. And Topher Kandik teaches English Language Arts at E.L. Haynes Public Charter School here in the district, and he is a GW alum who was District of Columbia Teacher of the Year. So these folks on the panel, we chose them because they all have different political views, but this is not Crossfire K-12. We're not, none of that, sorry. Instead, we're gonna have a collegial discussion about some of the issues that educators deal with in the classroom and their school districts. So without further ado, let's get started. So in general, getting back to one of the main questions that was part of our survey, do you guys feel comfortable sharing your personal political views with your students, and why or why not? What do you think is basically the appropriate role for educators on this point?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think as an educator, it's really important that we are teaching our kids critical thinking skills. And so generally, I would say no, an educator should not share their personal views unless it's in the context of a critical thinking discussion dialogue where all opinions and views are out on the table and being discussed. But I think it's really important that educators not force their views on the students that they're teaching. Kids need to learn to critically think on their own.
All right, thank you.
Actually, we have board policy that says we're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
But before I went into administration, I was a high school social studies teacher, so I taught mostly junior U.S. history and senior government. So within that class, you can't really have a conversation and be honest with kids and shape it without sharing with them where you stand politically. So I would let my students know so that they can understand the biases that I would speak to those issues with, and challenge them to have conversation with me, and they don't have to agree with me, and I don't have to agree with them, to listen and learn from each other and see how you get further into topics that way. But as an administrator, I expect my government teacher to do that with students, but I wouldn't expect my freshman English teacher to do the same.
Okay.
For me, I think it's important to, as a teacher, before any teaching, and I'm an English teacher in high school, before any teaching happens, to establish an authentic relationship with my students. So it's hard for me to do that if a student is asking me about myself, to be authentic and not engage in those issues. And I understand the issue about telling students what to think, but sharing your views, in my opinion, is is different than telling them what to think about political views. So I'm as open as I can be, and I have noticed in the last few years students being a lot more engaged in wanting to ask that question, which seemed almost taboo like 10 years ago when I started teaching. So it's an interesting finding, and I don't have a problem sharing my views, and I think it leads into these discussions that are critical thinking and really help students process in their own way.
So how has the current political climate affected your interactions with colleagues who might be kind of on the other side of the aisle?
The morning after the 2016 election, I came into the office, and a couple of employees in my office were very upset because another employee came in and had voted for Hillary Clinton and was quite upset that she had lost. So there was immediate tension and conflict right within the adults that were happening. And that I've seen that also play out in the schools. This election in particular, I think more than any other, really did create more polarization within the adults within our system.
And how have you dealt with that as a superintendent?
I'm kind of still with where Topher was talking about talking with kids. I think that I have intentionally focused on ensuring that conversations remain civil and safe and open, and have had conversations with adults either as a faculty or as an office or individually about the importance of respecting other people's opinions.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't think I've had to do that around politics before in my 30 years in the industry, having that intentional a conversation with adults.
Yeah. What about you, Dennis?
Well, I'm very fortunate to work in a school district that has a really clear statement. It's our ACT statement, and that is we are respectful and trustworthy, we care about each other, and we take responsibility. And that leads our conversations with kids when they make bad decisions in school and we have to call them into our office. It also leads our conversation in how we handle parents who come onto campus who might be unhappy about something that's happened, and in our interactions with each other. I mean, we talk about doing the hard work of getting along, because we have to model for students what that looks like. They can turn on the news and see what uncivil discourse looks like any given time.
Yeah.
But we need to be the ones who model what that looks like. And it's okay that you don't agree on everything. We don't all have to see things the same, but we want to afford each other the courtesy of listening and then making an informed opinion, because maybe somebody has information about something that you don't know, and that changes everything. And as educators, we're in the business of learning and growing, and so it's a great opportunity to model that for our students.
And I'd just echo what Dennis says, but add, in DC, there is a pretty monolithic voting bloc, so there's not a lot of, I don't encounter a lot of people who are vocally against the views that I have. That's just the way DC kind of partisanship is in the schools. But I think it's really important to remember the modeling issue, because even when you're not teaching in front of students, students are watching you and they're learning from you. So part of our job as teachers becomes to kind of inhabit that discourse that we want them to use when they're older. So I think it's really important, not just in the classroom to be modeling, which I think is something that'll come up later when we're talking about this, but also outside the classroom when they see that you have differences in whatever opinions or views, and be civil about it.
So what about within the classroom? Have you found yourself dealing with politically divisive issues among your students, and how has the climate impacted how your kids relate to each other?
We definitely have. We had some students who at a basketball game wanted to kneel during the anthem, and the high school principal was supportive of them, of their ability to express themselves respectfully. But then the next day we had another student come into the school wearing a Confederate flag as a cape. And so, that changed all the dynamics and caused a great deal of discussion within the school. But that's the kind of newer discussions that we're having to have as a result of the divisiveness of the nation right now.
Surprisingly, I haven't had as much of that going on as I would have anticipated, given the cultural climate today. But again, we're pretty out in front about communicating expectations. Like prior to elections, getting on there, hey, tomorrow we're going to have a new president. I remember making this announcement. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, but we're all going to come back to school tomorrow, and we're all Vail Academy and High School Boxers, we're all Americans, and we're going to be respectful about whether our candidate was the winner or the loser. And in a nation that is a democracy, that person holds that position for a number of years, and then we move on and we continue to do that. So this is not the end of anything or the beginning of something. It's just a continuation. So we just had that conversation with kids, and we didn't really have much of an impact the next day.
I have an entirely different experience. The day after the 2016 election, I was teaching at a school in Southeast Washington, which is 100% African American, and we were doing a writing program with a bilingual school uptown that was primarily Latino. And so the next day the mood was just off. And when we went to go up to this other school, the younger writers that my class was mentoring, I think they were in 2nd or 3rd grade. Those kids were terrified, and because a lot of them, their families were immigrants. They knew immigrants, and there was no solid information about what was going to happen to them. Yeah. And it was really scary for them. And that emotion really resonated with my students, who were, I would say, pretty apolitical going into it and pretty confident that the outcome was going to be that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. So that morning, they cried together with the young kids who were writing. And it really hit me that, it's important to kind of, not just to prepare them, but to get them into a position where they understand what's going on around them, because it didn't feel good as an educator to have so much kind of fear and emotion going on the day after an election. So that was my experience, and kind of after that, since then, I feel like that I've seen a lot more students involved in asking questions and being and trying to become involved politically.
Yeah. So about half the respondents in our survey voted for Hillary Clinton, and about a third voted for Trump. And I'm wondering, what do you guys think of the job that Trump is doing so far on education? If you voted for him, would you vote for him again? And if you didn't vote for him, would you oppose him again, or has he convinced you?
The big question of the day.
Yeah.
I voted not for him.
Okay.
And I would not vote for him again. I feel as though the nation's administration right now is really setting education back 200 years. We have worked very hard to build a very inclusive public school education system that serves every child, no matter where they're coming from. We don't even ask them their immigration status, actually. We don't get to pick and choose who our kids are or what problems they might come into the school with. We are inclusive. We build opportunities for kids to be inclusive with each other, to build a democracy, to build the ability to learn from and work alongside people who are different from each other. And I think the current administration is completely undoing that, both through their own actions as well as policies that are being discussed or even passed at the moment. And I'm very concerned about that.
Okay.
Well, I would start by saying I ran for office in 2016 myself as a Republican, and so I got asked this question all the time: do you support President Trump or candidate Trump? And I didn't like either of the candidates on the presidential ticket in 2016, to be honest. I would really struggle to vote for our current president again, because I think the administration has not really done a good job of setting leadership examples. I think that's probably the biggest issue. There's just a void of leadership in the White House. And as someone who's a leader of an organization every day, the decisions I make and the way I choose to treat people every day set a tone for children who are watching everything we do, and parents as well. I mean, a lot of educators say we serve children, and I think we serve parents.
Yeah.
Those are our constituents. They're the ones who buy houses in our area and pay the bills and elect our governing board, who then hires a superintendent who hires us. And so we have to model good behavior all the time. And so we walk that very fine line of encouraging parents to get involved and be role models for their children. At the same time, we can't tell parents what to do, because ultimately we work for them. So it's a very fine line.
So you voted for him kind of as the lesser of two evils, but you're not sure.
I used that
Yeah.
very phrase. Yes, I did.
But you're not sure if you will again.
I couldn't.
You couldn't again.
No.
Okay.
I'm just curious on like, have things changed, or is it just the kind of the realization of who the president is right now?
Oh, it was primarily an economic decision. I thought who would do a better job running the economy, and so that's why I went with our current president.
I didn't vote for Trump. I wouldn't vote for him again. I find it hard to use him as an example of someone who's presidential when talking to students. And I think tone matters a lot, and modeling matters a lot. And what I see coming from the White House, what I see coming from the Department of Education is not it's not the tone that I would like my students to have. And one thing that I think is really important, just to get back to the idea of being authentic, is I think we want our classrooms to kind of run as authentically and as kind of democratically as they can. And when the leadership at the top level of democracy is doing things that we wouldn't want our kids to do, there's something backwards about that. And that's not why you vote for the president, but that's part of it. And when speaking to kids, it's hard to justify bullying from the White House when you're asking your kids not to bully each other or being nice or any number of things. So it's very for me, it's really concerning, and I'm looking forward to leading the fight against him in 2020.
Oh, okay. So
that's not I'm not running for office for president. There's not an announcement in front of the audience here, but.
I guess you get a good vote from the GW alumni.
Yeah,
anyway.
the GW bump, I mean, it's famous.
Yeah, that GW voting block. Most of the educators that we surveyed were opposed to school vouchers, even if they were Republicans, which obviously that's an issue that President Trump and Betsy DeVos have been very passionate about. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that educators are against private school vouchers, even if they believe in many other Republican principles? And where do you personally stand on that?
I don't support school vouchers. I don't, again, for what I said earlier, I believe that public schools serve everybody, and vouchers segregate the population. So with school vouchers, it's usually people with means who access the vouchers, and you don't have a balanced school system. And I think it's undemocratic to have a segregated school system.
On paper,
Yeah.
I like the idea of vouchers.
Yeah, I hear you.
Because it gives parents real choice, right? Some parents, they live where they can afford to live. And as we've been hearing all day long, the neighborhoods in or the schools in neighborhoods that are lower income tend to be less successful as measured by the data points that we all use across the country. So to empower those parents with choice would be helpful. However, like you said, Jeanne, they are generally taken advantage of by the wealthier. The problem for me is that with those vouchers going to private schools, there is no requirement of special education. Mm-hmm. There is no state labeling system or accountability measure that we have to do. If those two pieces were added in and those schools that took vouchers had to provide special education at the rate that public education does, and they had to be assessed the same way that public schools do, and they could do it better, then why would we be opposed to that? Maybe we would learn something. I don't think that would be the case. And in Arizona, vouchers were made illegal several years ago. There was a court decision, so our legislature, in their very creative way, decided to create empowerment scholarships and give that money directly to parents, and then parents can decide where to get their kid educated. And then there was an initiative, and it was just defeated 63-37, which is a pretty loud margin. The voters in Arizona said, no, this issue needs to go away. So we've actually gone to the polls twice and had our state Supreme Court say no to vouchers and empowerment scholarships. So unless those other provisions are put in there, then I am opposed to it.
Okay.
And just to add, I'm not sure of any, maybe y'all know too, but I don't know of any research that is not unbiased that says vouchers work. Mm-hmm. And like you said, on paper, it might be a good idea, but in schools, we're not dealing with paper in schools. We're dealing with, kids' lives, and that's too valuable to be testing political theories on without the research behind it. I think it just seems like a bad idea.
I'd like to comment if I could on,
Sure, absolutely.
on kind of going through one person at a time. I have all these great ideas. If I didn't go first, I could say them later.
You take all my good ideas, so go last.
You can go first on the next question.
Anyway, what I wanted to come back and visit is as I'm listening to you, Dennis, what I'm hearing is that choice is a good idea, and I agree with that. And Vermont also does not have vouchers, and I was able to create 2 magnet schools within my system that allowed for public school choice. We have a high school public school choice within the state of Vermont, and then inter-district elementary school choice I was able to create in Burlington, and actually I was able to create it in the district I'm in now as well. So I think choice is good. I think choice is actually really good for education, which has been stagnant for too long. My concern with vouchers, and I guess I was responding thinking private school vouchers,
That was my,
is it is siphoning money away from all kids in an inequitable manner, because I think there are many kids who cannot access, even if they can access a voucher and go to a private school, they can't necessarily participate in it fully because they don't have the means or the transportation or the support at home to be able to do so. And again, the segregation occurs. And the third point I would add to yours is often it's a lack of certification as well. So there's a different quality of teaching, and I believe that public school teachers who have gone through significant education to get to where they were are excellent at what they do. And I'm concerned I'm not saying that every private school teacher hasn't gone through that, but private schools generally don't expect the same level of certification as public schools do.
yeah.
So can I just,
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Arizona, we had about 1,800 teacher openings at the start of the year, several consecutive, so classrooms without teachers.
Yeah.
So we have already lowered the bar in Arizona as to who can become a teacher. So we are almost at, individual districts may say we're gonna have to have everyone certified, but it's no longer a state requirement. So our bar is essentially you have to have a college degree,
Yeah.
that's good. And you have to go through a program, but you can come in and teach without any coursework or without student teaching. So
Wow.
yeah, we're already there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so similar topic on choice, and I'm going to ask Topher this question first, so that he doesn't take a good answer. The majority of teachers we surveyed, even Republicans, are opposed to charter schools. You teach at a charter school, so I'm guessing you have a different take on this. What do you think? Why do you think that even Republican teachers don't love the idea of charter schools? And what are your own personal views you're a charter school teacher? So.
Well, I'm not going to try to get in the head of a Republican, so
Yeah,
we can
Dennis can explain, yeah.
ask an expert. But for me, I think this is okay, so when I graduated from GW, I wanted to teach in a public school. And I interviewed around, and the only job I got was in a charter school.
Okay.
So I went to a charter school. Talk about economic need. So that was my choice, was to go where I was offered a job.
Makes sense.
If I was kind of being stubborn and just wanted to stay in a public school, might not be up here right now. So that's where my job is. But I think for this issue, this is an adult issue, and I think we can take a key from kids, because kids aren't asking each other, do you go to a charter school or do you go to a traditional public school? They're just hanging out as kids. And for me, it doesn't make sense it makes sense to go to a good school, but it doesn't make sense to say, and Dennis's school has been both, right? Has been a charter and regular. So to me, it's a silly game if you're in the same school and it's getting switched around from above you. So my stance has softened since I started working in charter schools, and I think we do some good work, and I think we're filling in some gaps that needed to be filled in DC.
Okay.
So Arizona, about 15% of students in public schools are in charter schools. So we, I think percentage-wise, have more than any other state. California's close. So it's been a big movement in Arizona for the last 20 years, charter schools, a little over 20 years. I think that they serve the choice thing that I've already mentioned. that provides that. But we have charter schools that are at the real high, kind of peeling off the 98 and 99th percentile schools, and we have charter schools that are alternative schools that are catching kids that the other schools have kind of let fall through the cracks. So both of those serve and fit a certain niche in the community. So I think that choice is good. What I don't necessarily like is the apples to apples comparison, because they're not. You know, if you think about how much most public high schools spend on extracurricular activities, sports and programs like that, the charter schools just, they don't do that. Yeah. In Arizona, if you're a charter school, you don't have to contribute to the state retirement, so you can offer people more money because you're not taking 11.5% of their pay and putting it into the retirement. You're not matching that, so it's not 23%, which is, I mean, these are Arizona political issues. So we get compared to schools that are serving different intentions and groups, and to say they're all equal is really kind of not a fair comparison. But for the most part, I think we found a pretty good way to make things work in Arizona. It could always get better, but I do like choice, and they are all public schools.
First, I have to correct something I said earlier. I said that Vermont didn't have vouchers. It actually does have vouchers at the high school level in towns that don't have high school.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah,
there are towns small enough in Vermont that there's no.
There are towns that don't have high schools. They have school board members though, but they don't have high schools. But we don't have charter schools. However, my feeling about charter schools actually is if they're public charter schools, it kind of fits in with the whole school choice idea that I supported earlier. And if they're private charter schools, I'm much more concerned for the same reasons that we already discussed.
And to my knowledge, we don't have private charter schools. If you are a charter, you receive public funds and you are accountable to the State Department of Education. So they are public schools. They just have a little different regulation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So moving on to another, non-controversial issue. Educators who responded to our survey had pretty mixed views on immigration. About 40% said they thought it was a good thing for schools, and another 44% said the impact was mixed. And we didn't ask about undocumented immigrants versus, you can in your answer differentiate if you feel like it's a different answer. So I'm wondering, what are your views on immigration, and how has that topic just in general impacted your school and your community? And Dennis, why don't you go first? Because I know you ran for office and this was a big issue when you ran, and not surprisingly in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, we're 60 miles from the border with Mexico. I think that, well, my school is about 50% white, 50% minority. The largest single group in the minority would be Hispanic students. So we have several native Spanish speakers. It's not, we don't have a very large ELL program. But I think it's just common sense. It's a reflection of the diversity of our nation. I mean, our nation is changing. And so having kids experience it, I think kids are way better at being connected to other kids' needs and how they're different than maybe, at least than I was when I was a kid, for sure. And so I don't see it as a problem. I see it as the direction we're going, and I think kids embrace that really well, and it's not really much of an issue for students.
I mean, in my opinion, we're stronger as a school. We're stronger as a community. We're stronger as a nation when we have diversity. And it would be hard for me to understand why someone would say it's bad for schools. Period. Like I would have to kind of unpack that answer from somebody.
I do feel really strongly about this issue, and very much in support of having a diverse student body and in support of immigration. My own kids are children of Vietnamese refugees. I ran a school system that had over 50 languages. It was a refugee resettlement center, Burlington, Vermont, and it had over 50 different languages in the high school of people all over the world. I think that that exposure to different cultures, to different viewpoints, to different thoughts are hugely important for our kids' success. I think that I have seen from experience kids who come from largely white Vermont, outside of Chittenden County, struggle more when they get to colleges that they leave Vermont for, because they just haven't simply been exposed to any differences. And so I've seen how it plays out. If you're not in a diverse student body system, it can be difficult. Okay, so we have time for, I think, one more question, so we'll do it lightning round style if we can.
We've gotten all the way to the end of our panel without mentioning Betsy DeVos, so felt like now's the time, right? Most of the educators we surveyed, even Republicans, even Trump supporters, don't approve of her performance as secretary. So what do you think of her job performance so far? And actually, I'm really curious about this as the reporter who covers the education department. How much of a difference does the inner workings of the department actually matter to your day-to-day? So what do you think of her job performance, and how much does what she's doing matter to you?
I'll jump in. I don't think she has performed.
Okay, that was succinct.
And I think that until Betsy DeVos was in office, I didn't realize how much the education department doesn't need to affect me.
Huh, okay.
At the same time, I'm very concerned with decisions being made, particularly with the removal of guidance around a number of different issues.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would guess it's a bigger issue at the superintendent level than at the building principal level. There's very little that happens there that doesn't trickle down several steps before it gets to me, and implementation issues. So I would say it doesn't have a big impact. Obviously, she's been in the news more than other.
Yeah, you're telling me.
You know, right? So, you know, my question is, was she ever qualified for the job? That's really more the question for me.
Was that a rhetorical question?
I think everybody has an answer for that one.
Agreed. I mean, I'd just go circle back to the modeling thing. And do we want our leaders to, what kind of stance do we want them to take about issues and about how we use government? And I'm not sure I agree with the way that she's led or not led the Department of Education. And it shows. And being in DC and knowing people at the department, the morale is down. It feels different, even if it's not daily affecting me in the classroom.
I would love to talk to you guys all more about that first story, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Thank you guys so much. It was really wonderful. Thank you.